Okay, I see it up there. It says, oh, it says live. All right. Well, welcome to XSharp from scratch. Hello, everybody. I can't see you, I can't hear you, but I know you're out there. And thanks for tuning into this session. If you're in the wrong session, now's the time to get up and move to the other room, but hopefully you're in the right place here. My name is Eric Selge, and I am a FoxPro developer from way back, almost as far back as Joel. I'm currently the IT security officer for the US courts. I don't get to do a lot of coding in that role, scripting maybe, but not coding. But programming is my first love. And so I'm happy to be able to do these kinds of sessions where it allow me to do some coding and learn some new things, which is why I take this on. I also like following recipes. And so hopefully today you're going to get a recipe for converting your applications from FoxPro to XSharp. So, all right, I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get started. I'm going to turn my camera off while I go into the session here. All right. The goal of this session, click, there we go. By the end of the session, you should have a solid understanding of what it takes to convert your FoxPro application to XSharp. And it's going to be beautiful, just like this cake. Here's our agenda quick. We're going to take a look at a sample FoxPro application that I whipped up real quick. And then we're going to, from scratch, create a brand new solution in Visual Studio. We're going to write and test the business objects from scratch again, compare how they look in FoxPro to how they look in XSharp so you can really see the differences. We'll create a custom control and then a XAML form for a user interface and do the data binding if we have time. Hopefully we do. And then I will be pausing a few times for Q&A during the session. Last time I did XSharp, Robert was right in the room with me and could answer most of your questions. He may be in the chat right now, so if you have XSharp questions, type the questions in, and if he answers them, then that's great. If he hasn't, then I'll be pausing a few times during the session to take your questions. And then afterwards, we can go out to another session room and do some Q&A. Let me tell you this right now, the white paper and slides that are in the FTP site for the downloads for this are, I guarantee you, out of date because I just uploaded the fresh ones to my GitHub account. So if you want the freshest code, the freshest white paper, and the freshest slides, go to this website right there and do a pull. If you don't know how to use Git, then I recommend you go see Rick Borup's session or find that recording or his white paper because he did an excellent job of explaining how Git works. But the current application is in the Fox To-Dos. That's the FoxPro application, and then the resulting application is in X To-Dos. All right, let's start with a recap of what XSharp is. It is a .NET language, and that is huge. It compiles to the same intermediary language as C# and all the other .NET languages, and it means it can take advantage of all the other .NET libraries and third-party tooling that's out there, which is fantastic. It's also has the FoxPro dialect, which means a lot of the same syntax that you're used to writing in FoxPro is available to you now in XSharp. It can read DBF files natively, which is a big plus for us because, you know, if we didn't need this feature, we could use a lot of other different languages, but hardly anything else can read DBF files natively. This is a huge one. It is open source, which means that you don't have to worry about some big corporation pulling the plug and leaving you without support. If you want to try to contribute back to the source code, you can do that. And it's not owned per se by anybody. And that's for most of XSharp. There are parts of it that aren't open source. And things are moving along nicely. A lot of what I actually presented last year at Southwest Fox is already out of date. And that's going to be the case again this year. Things are moving along so fast. And at the end, I'm going to mention a new tool that even makes a lot of what I say in this session obsolete. But that's all I'm going to say about XSharp. If you, that's not all I'm going to say about XSharp. That's all I'm going to say about that part of it. If you haven't read my white paper from last year, find it either on my website, Salty Dog LLC, or in last year's session notes. All right. So the app that we're going to convert today is called Fox To Dos, and it's a simple application. It didn't take me long to whip it up, but it may look familiar to you if you were in last year's Southwest Fox. It's actually based on Rick Strahl's Vue.js session, and you know, I did that because good programmers borrow and great programmers steal. And I'm a good programmer, so I borrowed a lot of what Rick did. This app doesn't use any framework in FoxPro. It's just actually very simple. I'll show you the underpinnings in a minute. But it uses DBF files, so we can show that off. And if I was going to use SQL Server, and then I could have just done it in C#, so what's the point? And what we're looking at here is a simple form with a couple of buttons, and then a grid, and then inside the grid is one column, and there's a custom control in that column that's bound to some data. It's pretty simple. I tried to scope it so that I could get across everything in about 75 minutes. Hopefully we can get through all this. Behind the scenes, it's a table, like I mentioned. It's a form. It's one form, one report. That's done with Report Wizard, actually. There's that custom control container and a visual class library. I wanted to show both kinds of class libraries so you can get a feel for converting both of them. Here is over here is the non-visual classes, the to-do classes, and we're going to actually spend most of our time today in the non-visual classes, converting those over, because that's really the core of our application. And then there's the simple code that gets us up and running, kicks off the form and all like that. All right, before we go any farther, are there any questions yet, Tamar?
Nope.
Oh, shoot. For a minute there, I thought I couldn't hear you, and I thought this is going to be a disaster. Okay, just great. So you're all with me at this point?
Yep, everybody's good.
All right. Is anybody watching? All right.
I can't tell that.
Okay. I'll just pretend like there's 1,000 people in an auditorium watching me right now. All right, so creating the Visual Studio solution. If this were a session on real programming, I would actually do like a test-driven approach right now and write a bunch of unit tests and approach it that way. But we've already got our existing application that we're going to convert, so we already know kind of what we're looking for as far as design goes. So let's skip over that part. As far as an IDE for XSharp goes, I could have chosen any number of them. XSharp, if you download it, gives you the option to download an IDE that they themselves have written called XIDE that's written in XSharp and really shows off the power of XSharp as an application. And that's very good too, but I'm going to actually use Visual Studio today because I have a copy of it and it's paid for, and so I might as well take advantage of it. It's also very well supported. Oops, how did that happen? It's also very well supported, and it is got a lot of features that I want to show off. So this isn't a class on Visual Studio. This is a class on XSharp, but we're going to learn a little bit about Visual Studio along the way, including the fact that in Visual Studio, we got to get our terminology a little bit right. In Visual Studio, what we call a project is actually a solution in Visual Studio, and that is actually a collection of projects, which are the main working units. Each project compiles down to either an EXE or a DLL as part of the solution. And projects can be based on templates, and that's what we're going to see in just a minute here. So project templates, yes. So project templates, when you choose to start a project by using a template, it will automatically set a bunch of the properties the way that you want them to be, and also seed the project with some files to get you going a little bit. It's not a framework, and we'll talk about frameworks later, but it's just a way to get you going and get your properties set up. When you download XSharp, and I'm not going to show you downloading XSharp because it's trivial, and I know you all know how to download and install software. When you download XSharp, it will automatically, if you have Visual Studio installed, install some templates for you, and you can see some check marks here next to the templates that are of particular interest for us. And to get going with converting our classes over to Visual Studio, we're going to use this project template called the class library FoxPro dialect. I'll point out a couple more things. Actually, we'll do this live in just a second, but And let's do it live right now. Okay, so here's a fresh copy of Visual Studio. I've got nothing open, nothing up my sleeve. And let's do a new solution. So we go File. This makes sense, right? New. And oh, look, there's no thing down here called Solution. That's weird. And that's because the way Visual Studio works, if you want to create a new solution, you start by creating a new project. And then you pick your project template. And here's our XSharp templates, like I mentioned. There's a ton of them. But we were mostly interested in the ones, not in the very visual objects of the Vulkan dialect, unless you want to learn that as well, but in the FoxPro dialect, because that's what we're here for. Let's give it a name. We'll call this, I'm going to call this BFF classes. So you know that that's a unique thing for this session. Under CDev, BFF, that should be good. And then I'm going to call the solution X2 X2Dos. That should be BFF. X2Dos VFF. Other things I'll point out here is that Visual Studio has the option to do. Oh, actually, I almost always mess this up. I almost always put the name of the folder here that I want, which is not really what I want to do. I want to put, this is the root folder that I want to put the solution in. And then if I check this box right here, it's going to create a folder underneath here with that name, and that's where it's going to put everything. So I want to make sure I get that right. Also, you see I have the option of automatically creating a Git repository for you. One of the things I love about Visual Studio is the integration of third-party tools, a lot of which we had to tack on in FoxPro, built right into Visual Studio, very sweet. So, okay, let's do that. Takes a second. One thing I don't like about Visual Studio is it seems a little pokey every once in a while to me. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to sneak back to here, and I'll tell you what choosing the project from a template gave us. It gave us, first of all, it automatically set the dialect to FoxPro. XSharp has multiple dialects that it can use because of its long history, starting way back with Clipper. But we are most interested in the FoxPro dialect because we chose a class library type of a project. The output type is going to be a class library, which is a DLL, and actually tells you right down here. Here's the name of the DLL it's going to be. Also under language, by choosing the FoxPro template, we get a couple of settings here that we want, which is to enable membar support and undeclared variables, which is, you can see down here exactly what they do, but makes it behave like FoxPro behaves and not like other languages behave. And also, and this is actually kind of a big one, it sets this inherit from custom class to true. And that makes your classes behave like FoxPro classes rather than .NET classes. It gives them an init and a destroy function, which wasn't really a thing in .NET. And it also creates virtual access and assign methods for our properties. We'll talk about that right here. So here's our first class that we're going to convert over from FoxPro. Here it is in FoxPro on this side. Here it is in XSharp on this side. And you should notice quite a bit of similarities with the XSharp code over here. We have a defined class as custom. That's important. A couple things that are different you'll notice right off the bat is in XSharp we have this using up at the top. And what's that all about? Well, in .NET and thus XSharp, nothing comes with unless you tell it to come with. So by saying, I equate these using statements a lot like set class lib to or set procedure to. It's essentially saying I'm going to be using some stuff from these libraries. So let's reference those right here. We also get this thing called a namespace, which groups classes together into a common namespace. In FoxPro, our namespaces were given to us by if we did an OLE class, it was the name of the file and then dot and then the name of the class. But here we can specifically say what our namespaces are going to be. And here's our defined class, which looks just like FoxPro's defined class. And this was not quite here last year. If you were in my XSharp session, it's all here now this year. One thing you notice over here in the FoxPro class is that I have access to, I'm going to create a property of our class called OData. And when I load up this task into this object, I'm going to just pull the record from the database and with a gather and then stick it right into OData directly. When I first started doing this session, scatter and gather weren't quite in XSharp yet. They actually are now. So here's another example of things moving quickly. And so what I'm going to show you here could be done more like FoxPro even than it is. But instead of putting it in an object like I did over here, I created specific properties for all of our different fields from ID to here down to completed that are in the database as properties of this class, and then a couple of extra objects as well. Now you might notice a couple of differences between the objects, and that's because when I started doing tests for the .NET stuff, I refined my design. It's a classic case of once you start implementing your objects and testing them, you find that the design that you initially did over here, which I whipped together pretty quickly, wasn't optimal. So things should look more optimal on the XSharp side. I mentioned the properties and the fields. There's a whole, I'm going to cut out a little section here to save some time, but there is a distinction between properties of an object, of a class, and fields in a class, and their protection. Here's another thing that's different. Over here I have my classic init in FoxPro. I could have had an init here, but I wanted to show off something that XSharp can do, which is have overloaded inits, essentially, overloaded constructors. Notice here I have a constructor with no parameters, and so if I instantiate this object without sending in any parameters, it's going to essentially create a new task for me. But if I send in an ID when I instantiate the object, it's going to load that task. Now I can do that in FoxPro too. The way we do it in FoxPro is we send in the parameter, and we see if it's an empty variable that was sent in. I could have done that with pcount as well, I guess. If that's empty, I create a new object. Otherwise, I load up the parameter that was sent in. The more I use XSharp, the more I love overloading functions like this. It's really quite powerful. Okay, I'm going to skip the part. Read in the white paper about fields and properties and what the custom object does for you. All right, let's look at another method that I'm going to convert over. And the point of doing this is to show you some similarities, again, some differences in between FoxPro and XSharp. Here is a new method to create a new task. I open my database, and that's a whole nother, I'll show you this method in a second. Of course, here I have the scatter blank name, which we're all very familiar with, along with the memo clause, which I don't even think I have a memo field, but I throw that in there every time as a matter of course. I mark as a property that this is a new task, and then I just close the database if it was open. If it wasn't open. Here, again, I've overloaded the new function. If I call the new function without a parameter, and the parameter is the title of the task. So if I create a new task and don't send in a title, it just creates a new task with no title. Otherwise, I have a title. I blank out my properties. And here's what I love about working with .NET is a lot of the stuff that's third-party add-ons for FoxPro are just available for you right from some other library in .NET. So if I want a new GUID to use as a primary key here, all I have to do is use this GUID static class and call the new GUID method on it. And then I convert that to a string from a GUID, and then I've got my new primary key. I do kind of the same thing here with datetime. That's a static class that has a now property, which is the current date and time. And I throw that into the entered field. I mark that it's a new one, and I set the title to whatever was sent in. So over here, I didn't do that whole title thing. That's probably a function of when I was doing the testing, and I thought that would be a good thing to have. If you like this sort of thing, datetime now, I'll refer you back to that FoxTypes class that's in XFRX that does that kind of thing, along with a lot of the string handling. I'll show you in a minute. All right, let's look at one more class. This one's load. This is the one that loads a record from the database into this object. In FoxPro, you send in the ID. It checks to see if you did send in an ID. If you didn't send in an ID, then it uses the ID that was already loaded. If it's good to go, it opens the table, looks for the record, scatters the name, which is something we can do, stores that ID as a property, and then marks that it's now loaded and it's not a new object. It has the try catch, and then finally closes the table. Look how similar it is in XSharp. I mean, this looks almost the exact same. Open the table, look for the ID. Was it there? If it was found, load up the properties. And I could have nowadays I could do gather. Well, that should be gather. That shouldn't be scatter. Should that be scatter? Okay, I might have my gathers and my scatters back reversed. And then closes the table. Very similar. Very nice. One thing I want to point out here, is it here? Yeah. Look at this right here. I can mix and match different dialects a little bit in XSharp. So I can use false instead of .f dot, and it does not complain at all. Also, it's case insensitive too, which is more like Visual Basic than C#, which is nice. Oh, here's another method we're going to take a look at. Here's the save method in FoxPro. And notice in FoxPro, to get that GUID now, and for some reason I did it on the save in FoxPro rather than the new, I have to do something to create a GUID. And one way I found using FoxWikis is to do the script object. And this isn't ideal because a lot of companies put lockdowns on their PCs that don't let them instantiate this object. So hopefully this will work, but the GUID method in .NET will always work. There's no restrictions on that one. This is a very nice feature of FoxPro, and this is really one downside of XSharp at the moment, which is that we can just insert a record into a table with one command, right? Insert into the table from name and then the name of the object. That is a powerful statement that replaces a lot of what you had to do over here in XSharp. Now this isn't bad, and this is what we were used to before we got insert, which was what VFB. Put it in the comments if you know which version of FoxPro introduced this. Also notice, I skipped the try catch last time, but you can totally do try catch. Oops, you can totally do try catch in XSharp as well. They have the same construct. One thing I want to point out here too, I had a little trouble with, and we're not really sure why, but notice how I say et al up here because I didn't have space to put all the locals in here, but I do have a local C title, C descriptor, L completed, and I assign my properties to those local variables and then do the replace from there. When I was doing the replace title with this .title, it was actually complaining, but I worked around that by assigning it to a local variable and then replacing it with a local variable. We're not quite sure why that happened. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, but this fixed it, so I'll work around. And that's the thing you'll find a lot when you're working with XSharp is if things don't work exactly like you're used to in FoxPro, it's usually no big deal. There is a workaround for it. All right. And everyone wants to see how XSharp works with tables, with DBF tables. Here's in FoxPro, here's in XSharp. And if that doesn't look exactly like FoxPro, I don't know what does. I'll point out a couple things here. In XSharp, if you set default to a path that doesn't exist, it doesn't complain. But then if you try to use the table thinking that you're in the right folder, it will complain because it's not going to have the right table. I was misspelling this for a while and couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. And it was because it was not doing it and then just moving on. And then when I tried to use the table, it wasn't there. So just be aware of that. And then to close the table, this is a nice feature again in FoxPro that's not quite there in XSharp. But again, there's an easy workaround. We can just say use in and then select the name of the alias that we're in. And if that's not open, if it's not selected, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't fail, it just moves on. The similar thing this is not quite implemented in XSharp yet, or maybe it is by now, I don't know. The similar function in XSharp is used in core DB SimSelect. And this is where I want to point out that all of these commands that we're used to in FoxPro as declarative commands, use, and anything table related, all of XSharp is object oriented, and the object that deals with tables is core DB. And so under the covers, everything's getting translated into a method call on core DB. And so if you can't figure out how to do something, look at the documentation for core DB, and you'll see the native XSharp equivalent of it, and it makes it easy. Okay, so is this where I pause for questions? Yeah, let's. Any questions up to this point?
Yes.
Okay.
Dave asks, is there a with end with construct?
Oh. Is Robert in the session?
He is.
I don't know, but let's go over to live code and plug in all of the code that I've shown you here into Visual Studio, and then we can do a live with and see how that goes. How's that sound, Dave? Don't answer that, Dave. You can't hear me. I can't hear you. All right. So let's go to our class here. And notice this is actually interesting. When I remember I said I wanted a project based on FoxPro, but right now the starter class that it gives me looks more like the core.net defined class. I think they just need to update their templates. It's no big deal. I'm just going to wipe that out, and I'm going to paste in from the cake I have in the oven over here my working code, and we'll just take a look at that quick. And then we'll get to Dave's question, and then we can take more questions after this. So here is all of the code that I just showed you, pasted into my class. There's my define class syntax, which looks just like FoxPro. Everything I just showed you. So let's try, Dave. Let's do with and end with. Where should we try it here? Let's see, I need an object. Actually, it's going to work better on the next class. So let's hold that question for a second, Dave, and we'll come back to you. Any more questions?
In the meantime, Robert did answer in the chat that yes, there is with and with.
Robert.
Okay, and Barb asks, how about cursors and embedded SQL?
Hi, Barb. Those two things are the main features that aren't in XSharp quite yet. There is something very much like cursors. .NET has data tables, and they are similar, but the XSharp devs are very much aware that cursors are a thing that we want, and I'm sure it's on top of their list. And embedded SQL, like I mentioned with that insert into command, is another one. Now there is link, which is kind of like embedded SQL, but it ain't the same. There is SQL exec, so if we're looking at doing calls to another SQL server or some other database, you can certainly do SQL exec with SQL commands, but there is not inline SQL yet native to the FoxPro dialect, and that's mostly because Clipper never had that stuff, so they're working on that. Okay, good questions. Thanks, Barb. I'm going to rename this to. So the convention in XSharp in .NET actually is to name the program the same name as the class. I'm going to call that X2Do. All right, should we see if it compiles? Any more questions tomorrow?
So you may have answered this. So if no cursors yet, what holds the temporary data? ADO data sets or something like that? And I see that Robert already answered in chat. So.
Did he answer data table objects?
Yes.
Okay, that'd be the sort of the closest equivalent to cursors. There are a lot of data structures to hold data in .NET. Data tables and data sets are probably the closest thing to what we call tables and cursors. And they're object oriented, which is pretty cool.
Okay.
All right. Hey, look at this.
One more quick, I hope quick one. What level of IntelliSense is there, if any?
On a scale of like 1 to 10, or what do you? There's good IntelliSense, very good IntelliSense. When you're coding, there's not as good of IntelliSense when you're debugging and you're actually in the debugger, but when you're actually doing the code itself, it's pretty good. I'll show you some of that in just a second. I can probably show you that later. So if I do this dot, see I get my stuff, and notice how it picked up on the fact that new is overloaded and shows me both options for my class. This is my class. This isn't the .NET class. The .NET class that's all in there, right? This is my class, and it's already got the IntelliSense working, which is great. And I actually learned something earlier today, and I want to point that out now, which is nice as well. When I showed you that new method, I overloaded it, and I could have done it like this. So here I did one new method, and I said if you didn't send in a parameter, then just default to a blank parameter. Well, it turns out you can do that with this syntax too. You say new, and then send in the title, and also if they didn't send in the title, default it to a blank title. So we oftentimes do like eval, EVL, or something to do the equivalent in FoxPro. So this is how you do that in XSharp, which is nice. So I don't even really need this for this example. Now, oftentimes you would use overloading when there's a variable number of parameters that you want to send in, and there's not really a good default for any one of them, or you want to require a parameter. All right, how's that? Now let's leave that in there because I don't want to mess anything up. All right, so I showed you that code. So that was one class. Now let's do a second class, which is a collection object for the first class. Our first class was one task, which is called X to do. This one's a collection of those X to dos. And boy, I really wish I had called them tasks rather than to dos, because it's a lot easier to say tasks. It makes more sense. But this ship has sailed. In FoxPro, what we would do if we wanted to start a new class, right? We'd come down here. Here's the last end defined for that class. So normally we'd come down here and we'd say define class, and then do like that. This is not the convention in .NET. It's not that it can't be done, it's just that it shouldn't be done. Convention in .NET is every class goes in its own code file. So rather than start it right there, we create a new class in a new code file. So this is going to be our introduction to file templates, which we kind of saw a little bit earlier. We come back to our project here. We say add new item. And hopefully that's easy enough to see. And we're going to say code. And notice a couple things. I'm going to say it's going to be a class. Notice it defaults to a PRG extension. And that's because it already knows that this project is in the FoxPro dialect. So it's only showing me item templates that are in the FoxPro dialect, which is actually exactly what I want. Saves me a little bit of hassle there. And I'm going to call it whatever I want my class name to be. And I say add. And you see I get my new class up here. And again with the older syntax, but that's not a big deal. I'm just going to get rid of that. And I'm going to pull this cookies out of the oven and just type in some code here real fast. There it is. Now I've got my second class in there now, my collection of to-do objects. And this is not, I'm going to show you in a second why this is not going to compile, but I'm going to show you this first. So this is a lot like document view in FoxPro. If I wanted to jump to a class name right away, I can just pull that down. And this will also show you which classes I just add. So there's my open and close to-dos to open and close my tables. Get to-do, which I send in an ID, and it gets that one to-do object You can see it returns an X2Do, which is that class right there. Load, which loads up all of the data in my table into a data structure, not a data table, which I'll talk about in a second, but it loads it into something called an observable collection. Actually, you can see it if your eyes are wandering down here. This is my collection of individual tasks. I called it A to-dos from the old, the convention in FoxPro where array started with an A. But it's really not an array at all, even though .NET has arrays, and they're very powerful in their object-based, which is fantastic. Let's see, I also have to create a new task, to toggle a task off and on. I send in a task and it turns it off or on. I delete a task, and then I get the last task that was entered. I put that in there for my unit testing. So, as I mentioned, I have an observable collection here. And if I try to compile this right now, it's going to complain because it's going to say, I don't know what an observable collection is. And this gives me a chance to point out a couple different things. One is that when you get an error when you compile in .NET, you can just double click on the error and it takes you right to the line of code that had the error, which is fantastic. Second thing is when you click on this little link right here, or if you right click and say show error help, it takes you to a web page on the XSharp website that gives you more description about that error. Usually, it doesn't not every description is filled in, but a lot of them are, and they're pretty helpful. The other thing is these are standard error codes, a lot of them. Well, that wasn't loaded up, so it's going to take a moment. These are standard error codes. So if there's no information on the XSharp website, you can oftentimes just Google the error code and it'll tell you what the problem was. Can it come up here? Yeah. So here's an example of what you see on the XSharp website if you have an error, and then hopefully that'll help you out. Now the problem here is that I have this thing called observable collection, and like I mentioned before, .NET doesn't really load any more than it has to. By default. So there is no native data type called observable collection, and it's not in any of these libraries right here. So if I want to use an observable collection, I need to actually tell .NET, or XSharp in this case, that I am going to be using the library that has that. Now if I had something like ReSharper or something like that, I'd actually get a little link right there, and I could just click on it and it would add that for me automatically. I barely had time to learn this. I didn't have time to learn ReSharper at any time as well. There's probably other tools like that too. I'm not sure why I'm typing this when I could be copying and pasting it, but you get the idea. Okay. CD since that has to be capitalized, even though it doesn't. Now if I compile it, it should compile just fine. 116. Okay. Perfect. That's not what you need to see. That's it. There we go. File templates. So that was file templates, and we put in all of the code for our second class. I need to find my notes. Here. There we go. Okay, so now how do we know if this works, right? Well, I already showed you the most common way that most developers decide if something works. Does it compile? If it compiles, it works, right? I also showed you the double click to jump to the code and the help file. There is a debugger in Visual Studio. I know you're probably shocked to hear that. It works almost exactly like FoxPro's debugger. You'll be able to figure it out easily enough. So that's one way to test. That's probably not the definitive way to know if your code works. Another thing that we FoxPro programmers like to do is jump to a command window at this point and maybe instantiate our object manually and then kind of poke and prod at it to see if it does what we want it to do. Unfortunately, Visual Studio doesn't have a command window, so that's not really an option. It does have, XSharp allows you to download something called XSI, which is the XSharp interpreter. which works a lot like a command window. It lets you instantiate objects from libraries in .NET and do things with them a lot like a command window. But because I chose the Visual Studio route, I'm not going to show you that because that's not an option in Visual Studio. But if you're interested in something like that, check out XSI. Look in last year's white paper. All the information is in there. So what we're going to do instead, just to kind of quickly test whether our application kind of works, whether it even works at all, is we're going to create a console app. A console app, it looks like a DOS app, but we can use it's a user interface, a rudimentary user interface that we can use to instantiate our objects and kind of output some display. It's really our first user interface for this object, or for this application, so it's kind of exciting. So let's do that. To do that, what we do is we'll click on the solution, we'll say add a new project, and then we're going to pick a console app, and we're going to set that as the startup project so that when we run the application, it becomes the thing that actually runs. And then we got to make sure that we add a reference to it to our business objects, which are in that other library. Otherwise, it's not going to have any connection between them. So here's what it's actually going to look like under the covers. It's a simple application. Here's that using again that says, hey, this is a library of things that we want access to. We're going to, I just pulled out one of the GUIDs at random to test with. I'm going to instantiate one of the tasks. That one actually has a method to open the table, so I'm going to use that method to open the table. And I'm going to scan through. This should look a lot like FoxPro code, right? I'm just going to scan through the table and output some stuff. And then I'm going to instantiate that one test object that I have just to see if it loads. And did it load? And if it did load, give me some information about that one object. Here, I'm not instantiating an object for each one of these. This is coming straight from the table right here, straight from the DBF. Close the table. If I couldn't open the table, I'm going to tell you that I couldn't open the table. And this was actually crucial in debugging that why I couldn't open the table earlier when set default didn't work for me. And you may be looking at this and going, whoa, Eric, what's up with this? This is not FoxPro. This is not FoxPro. That's indeed true. I love the way you can mix and match syntax in this thing. And console write is so much more powerful than anything we had in FoxPro. What you got going on here is I'm saying for the first parameter, this is all zero based, right? For the first parameter, write that one out and format it in 2 digits, and then put a colon in there, and then an ID colon, and then that second parameter, which is the ID from the table. This is going to be the record number, and then give me the description in that third parameter. And then also on the same line, give me a dash, and then the status, and then here's an inline if right there, immediate if you will. And then down here, here's kind of the equivalent statements in prints. And I don't know, I look at this and I look at this, and I think this is a whole lot easier to read. I don't know about you. That's what our console application is going to do, and when it's over, it should look like this. There's our nicely formatted record number, skipping the deleted records. I wanted to show you that. There's that ID colon, and then there's the primary key. These actually came from Rick's table, and then I switched it over to GUIDs right here. I had to expand the field out a little bit so it all hold. And then here's the description of the task. So let's see if that works, shall we? Let's go back to our project, which is right here. So like I said, we're going to create a new project on the solution. We say add new project. It's going to be a console app in the FoxPro dialect. We'll call it VFF console. We'll keep it in that same location. Say OK. And this time it seeds us with something that looks a little more like FoxPro. There's our print statement, which is very FoxPro-like. Somebody asked in the rehearsal of this session whether XSharp supports this syntax. I'm super happy to say it does not. Oh, I don't think it does. Let's compile it and see. It didn't last night. Let's see if they fixed it. Nope, still doesn't, which is excellent. I I'm glad they can leave some things behind. Now, as I mentioned, I want to set our console application as the startup project. I also want to add a reference to our classes so that this knows that it can use the classes that are in that library. So I say add a reference. I'm going to pull it right out of this project. It's called BFF classes. Okay, so now that it knows about that. Also in this piece of code here, I'm going to be using those BFF classes. BFF classes. So now that's like my set class library 2, right? And then I'm going to do some quick coding behind the scenes here. Nice. Same exact code I showed you earlier. Now when I say start, it should compile, and because this is set as the startup project, it should run and show me a console application. Let's see how this goes. You can't see it because it's on the other monitor. There it is. And there is our data. How are we doing on questions tomorrow?
Is there something like field mapping in XSharp?
Field mapping. I don't know if I know what that is. Field mapping.
I think that's talking about where you associate a particular control with a particular field.
Like data binding? Because we will talk about data binding in a little bit when we get to our next user interface.
I don't think that's what was meant, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe Goodwin will add.
Well, this would be a fine time to mention too that XSharp can work with entity framework. So if that's what they're talking about, I think then there's that.
Okay. And Shannon asks, can a function be written in pure C#?
Hey, Shannon, how are things down there? Can a function be written in pure C#? That's a great question. Kind of. When you're writing code, the language that the compiler understands is based on the properties of the project. So notice in here I said that this is the FoxPro dialect. But I can totally have another project in the solution that is a C# project, and I can compile it and run it right alongside my XSharp stuff. So if I have a C# classes, as long as they're in a different project, they'll compile next to my XSharp classes. But no, they can't be combined in one project, I don't believe. I'll mention when we get to the user interface that there's so little code in there that it almost doesn't matter if you choose XSharp or C#, because most of the code is actually here in the business objects or in the non-visual classes. So if you choose C# for your user interface language, that's totally fine. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, and back to the field mapping question, I've got the clarification that I thought it was that as in you can drag and drop from a table definition to, and it knows what control class to use.
Now seems like a fine time to mention what a bad idea that was in FoxPro. And even though they let us do that, it's not ideal that we bound our user interface directly to our databases. It's better to have that intermediary object between the two that separates the user interface from the database. But this is not a time to get into the theory of why this is good or bad. No, the short answer is no. XSharp doesn't have that. The longer answer is it's okay that XSharp doesn't have that because that wasn't a good thing to do. In my opinion, of course. In my humble opinion, of course. I could be totally wrong. It did make things nice and easy, though, I'll tell you that.
And it looks like all the other questions Robert has answered in the chat.
Thank you so much, Robert. I'm so glad you're there to take care of that, because you really are the expert on this stuff. I'm just a FoxPro guy trying to learn it as best I can, and hopefully nothing I'm saying is incorrect. If it's out of date, yeah, please, or incorrect, just post the correct information in the chat, and then I will try to learn from that as well. All right, where were we here? PowerPoint. All right, we've got our console. Hey, you might be thinking, hey, Eric, hold up, buddy. How do I know that this isn't some sort of ace up your sleeve that you didn't pre-cook in order to make it look like XSharp can actually use DBFs, but it's actually pulling the data from somewhere else or from memory? Well, let's just do something real quick here. Here's that Fox. Okay, I'm gonna have to drag the entire thing over. Here's that FoxPro app that I mentioned earlier. And if I come down here to, where'd it go? There it is. That's weird. Huh, every time I click on it, it goes away. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna do it on the other screen since it's not letting me do it on this screen. I'm gonna go down to one of these slides, and I'm gonna put in there. Tamar, can you tell how many? Oh, I'm gonna put Shonen in there, just because there's no way I could have known Shonen was going to be in the session, and so I couldn't have cooked this up in the meantime. I'm going to add his name into one of my. Oh, I'm going to do it right here. Hello, Shonen. Okay, this is the FoxPro database, right? Now, if I go back to Visual Studio, and if I run this again, I should see a task whose description is hello, Shonen. There. As long as it wasn't one of the deleted ones. Oh, there it is. All right. Nothing up my sleeve. I'll tell you're all very impressed. Deafening roar. Right, let me put this away because this is confusing me. Okay, so let's go back to our slides. Got that one. I like how you get to see my notes. All right. This is no way to test our code, by the way. I mean, it's fine to kind of check quickly to see if something's run, but let's talk about unit testing real quick, because that is ideal. In true test-driven development, of course, we would have written our unit tests before we even wrote any of that business logic. But of course, we're so far beyond that at this point. We've got our code that's been running for 20 years. So we're going to skip over what real test-driven development is. Also, this isn't even true test-driven development because we're integrating it with our database, and so it's not isolated. But I don't want to get into what that all is. If Christoph's in the session, he can tell you why this isn't true TDD. But we are going to write some unit tests quick to test our code out, because it really is awesome the way this works in Visual Studio. And I'll show you how this works with your XSharp classes. So I love FoxUnit, as you know, but it's not integrated in with FoxPro into the IDE. It's a separate application that you run sort of on the side. In Visual Studio, unit testing is built right into the IDE. You actually have your choice of multiple different frameworks for unit testing as well. I'm going to choose NUnit because that's actually very, very close to FoxUnit as far as functionality and look and feel. What we do is similar to how we did the console application. We say we want a new project. It's going to be an NUnit project with FoxPro dialect. And then we're going to put in some test code that looks essentially like this into our class. And then we're going to run the code, and hopefully they all turn green like this. So let's do that quick. So we go to our solution. We say we want a new project again. And you can have, like I mentioned before, a solution is a collection of projects. And this is how it goes. You keep adding all the projects you need to make your stuff work. So I'm going to say add a new project. This one is a test project under XSharp again. And I'm going to pick the NUnit framework. And I'm going to call this one XFF tests. No, that's not it. Virtual FoxFest tests. And once again, it seeds my new project with a couple of files, some properties. I can get rid of the initial stuff that it gave me, and I can put in the code that I wrote already, which is right here. Right here. You just annotate all the methods that are tests with this syntax here. And so essentially I'm going to go through and flex all of my methods and say, does that actually work the way I think it should work? If I compile this right now, it's actually not going to work. Does anybody know why it's not going to work? I can't ask you this because there's a 20-second delay. So the reason it doesn't work is because this code doesn't know anything about my objects yet. You got to always remember that you need to tell it set class lib2, which is actually using, and then also I need to add a reference here to those classes so that it knows where to find them. All right, so now if I compile, I should see over here in my Test Explorer, which I guess I've had to open the entire time, but now you're actually going to see what it can do. I should see everything that is a test show up right here in my Test Explorer, not in a separate application like FoxPro, but in the Test Explorer. And I had this problem last night. I don't know how to get around it now. Let's see here. The other thing I need to do, which I didn't do, is I need to add references to the XSharp stuff as well, because it is using stuff that's in XSharp in addition to my classes. So that needs to be up there as well. Is that thanks? Let's do this. Just EFF classes. Oh, here, let me rebuild the entire solution. That's lovely. Anybody in the comments know why this isn't working? I'm getting yellow. Oh, let me check one thing here. Let me check the target framework. This might need to be updated the same as everything else. If this doesn't work, I'm just going to show you this one over here. Okay, well, let's do this. Let's pull the finished cake out of the oven. This is what it's supposed to look like. And you can see here over in my test harness here, I've got all of my tests that I was going to run, and I can just run them all. And if I get all greens, that means that's good. I did keep having problems with NUnit, and I'll just throw this out there, with it saying things like, hey, I couldn't load that test, couldn't load the test classes, and a couple of other errors too. And I found if I went out to the cache for NUnit, which is stored under app data, and just wiped out that folder, and then just reloaded it, everything worked just fine. So that's NUnit. And then you can see I got greens. Oh, I got one that's wrong here. I double click on the test, takes you right down to that test. And the actual, I know what the problem is here. I need to say trim on this one. And then if I just run that one test again, green, come on. Get one. There it is. And perfection. But what happened? It was green a second ago. All right, I'll show you one more thing, which is that you can debug tests by just putting a breakpoint in there, right-clicking on it and saying debug the test. Oh, I know what the problem is. I actually changed I changed the description of this earlier today from finish paper to give presentation. So actually this should fail because what I expected is not the same as what I returned. So that's my bad. That's my bad. Okay, but if they do all turn green, which they would if I just put the right string in there, there would be perfection. Okay, how are we doing? Any questions before we start into the forms?
I don't see anything that didn't get handled.
Excellent. Thank you for handling that, whoever's handling all that. I assume Robert's out there. All right. So let's talk about now a real user interface. The console app probably is not going to be enough for your client. You want something that is prettier. So at this point, we got all our business logic converted over to XSharp. We've done the unit testing, and we know that it works the way we think it should work, but we don't have a proper user interface yet. We can actually choose from a couple of different choices off the menu. We can actually make an Angular website or any website, an ASP.NET website if we wanted to. Because these business objects, when they're in .NET, are usable from all kinds of different places, we can create a Xamarin app, for example, if we wanted to write for something for the phones. But because we're converting a FoxPro for Windows application over, we're going to choose one of the desktop choices. And there's two choices when it comes to writing desktop applications for Windows in .NET. You've got WinForms, which is the original form designer for .NET, and it actually looks a lot like FoxPro's form designer. And then you've got something called Windows Presentation Framework, which is what we're going to use because it's newer, it's more scalable, which in this day and age, when you have 4K monitors and stuff, have you ever tried to look at your FoxPro applications in a 4K monitor? It is not always pretty. But because WPF is vector-based, it scales nicely down to a phone, up to a 4K monitor, whatever. It is more complex than WinForms, but that also makes it far more powerful than WinForms. It's a lot easier to create custom precision objects that look exactly the way you want them to look in your application, because it uses a HTML-like syntax. It's also styleable. If you've ever wished for something like CSS in your applications, your forms, you will like WPF because it has styles that you can just change the style in one place, and everywhere else it updates itself. And it's probably going to stick around longer. I know there's been some talk that WinForms is not going to make the jump to .NET Core, and I'll talk about .NET Core in a second, but WPF definitely will. Now they've kind of backtracked off and said maybe it will make the jump, but you don't want to invest at this point in a technology that may not be around for the long run, do you? So let's go with WinForms or WPF. Let's go with WPF. There are entire books written about WPF, so I'm not going to be able to make you all anything near WPF experts. I just want to get you a little bit familiar with it today, and then maybe check out a book. Data binding in particular is very, very not difficult, but involved and powerful. And this isn't an XSharp thing. This is a WPF thing that makes it a little tricky. So I would definitely recommend going to view Robert Vanderhulst's video on data binding in XSharp, because that's really kind of the next step after this session. It takes what we're going to end up with here to the next level. So, and I've looked at his white paper; it's fantastic. So we're not going to be able to get into it too deep here. But here's the gist of what you got to do. You start with a WPF form project, again with the new project thing, and that'll seed you with a blank form. And then behind the scenes, it'll have this is what the form code looks like. And behind the scenes, it'll have a class that is based on the application object. So let's do that over here in our code. Is our code still running? Oh, what's going on there? Oh, it's debugging. Oh, it's debugging stuff back there. It's doing exactly what we told it to do. All right, so we say new. Oops, not on this one. We're going to do it on this one. New project, and this one's going to be a Windows WPF application. XSharp. We'll call this one EFF app. This is going to be the one that runs. Okay. And just like the slide showed, it's going to seed it with some item templates. And I'm going to switch my startup project from the console app to our new BFF app. One thing I didn't mention with the console app, but I should mention real quick here, is that remember that the console app had a start method. And this is how, when you say start on your application, this is sort of the hook that kicks everything off, right? Notice that the XAML app up here does not have a start. Here's the actual app. It doesn't have a start application. So the way it knows what to do when it starts is there is a startup URI attribute on the application element, and that tells it that when I start up this application, fire up this window right here. Okay, so here's our window, just like our slide showed. And isn't that beautiful? Let's run it and see what happens. Keeps coming on the second screen. Hey, there it is. So right out of the box, we get, without doing anything, we get a window that starts up automatically. It's got a title, and it can minimize and maximize and close. There was no do events or read events. I'm sorry, there was no read events. There was no on shutdown or anything like that. And that's because, like I mentioned, it was all, this app inherits, is a subclass of the application object in .NET, and that gives you a whole lot of functionality right out of the box. It's not a framework, but it's a class that gives you some nice functionality for getting your application going. It has a bunch of properties for the application, stuff that we would have probably stored in the, the underscore VFP object or something like that. And the white paper has more information on that. So that app doesn't do too much. There's what the app looked like. Let's see, we'll start up with that. There's no events. Okay, so. So let's add some, that form doesn't do too much. So let's add some controls to that form real quick. And when it comes to adding forms or controls to a window, you can't directly. You have to start by adding what's called a layout container to the window. And then you can add controls into that layout container, which is actually fantastic. It makes the, when you add controls, the different kinds of layout containers have different behaviors so that the controls behave differently without doing that absolute positioning that we used to do in FoxPro, where you'd have a left and a top and everything would be there, and then maybe you would have an anchor to decide what happens when you expand and contract the window. That's all built into the layout containers in XAML, in WPF, I should say. XAML is the language that WPF is the technology of. So there's different kinds of layout containers. There's a canvas, which is kind of like a FoxPro container in the sense that you have to explicitly tell it where to put stuff. That's not really ideal. There's a container called a grid, so that every control that you add goes into a checkerboard row or column, a stack panel, a wrap panel, and a dock panel. And that essentially, like I mentioned, has different behaviors. I'm going to kind of hurry through this because the white paper has more information. And then there's a toolbar panel, which actually looks a lot like our toolbar class in FoxPro, in that you put stuff on there, and then when it gets to be too much, it creates like an overflow area. So our window is going to have a stack panel directly in the window. And then in that stack panel, we're going to put a toolbar on the top. Because remember, in our FoxPro app, we had those two buttons at the very top for adding and printing the tasks. So we're going to have two buttons in our toolbar panel, one for adding and one for printing our tasks, two buttons. And then we close the toolbar panel, and then we'll hold off right there, and that'll be we'll start right there. Now, you may look at this and think, oh, that's ugly and verbose, but it's really not too bad once you get used to it. And there is IntelliSense, so if I come in here and start typing in the name of a property, it will autofill. And there's also, if you're the kind of person that likes the property pane, there is still a property pane that you can use to fill out the properties of the controls. So let's look at that quick over here. So I'm in my window here now, and I'm in the XAML, and it starts me with a grid layout, but I'm not going to do a grid layout. I'm going to do, like I mentioned, the stack panel with the toolbars. I'm just going to pull that from over here. Over here, right there, right there, right there. Stack panel toolbars. I'm going to put that in. Instead of the grid, I'm going to put it on the stack panel. If I do things right, I should see two buttons right there. And what I don't have is my the images on the buttons, because I have to add those to my project directly. Can I just drag it and drop it there? No. So you're not actually seeing the images right now, but they should be there. Sorry, don't worry about this commented also. Okay, so I'm just going to skip putting the images, but imagine a plus sign and a print object right there, because I want to show you binding events to these buttons real quick. The way you do this in XSharp is you have this these attributes of the windows called command bindings. And this is like a router. If you saw Andrew McNeil's session about routing and how everything goes through that router, it's kind of the same idea here, where you have a command binding, you give it a name or a command, and then if it's executed, here's the function that runs. That's actually a name, I'm sorry. If it's executed, here's the function that runs, and whether or not it can be executed, so it's like enabled and disabled in FoxPro, is based on the results of this method here. And the way that plays out in XSharp is these go into your code behinds. Those are the can it be executed, and I'm just returning true here, so these can always be executed. And then once it is executed, what am I going to do? I'm just going to show a message box right now, and then I just need to add the attribute to the button saying, hey, if I click on this button, this is kind of like the on click. If I click on this button, fire this command, and rather than directly calling this function, it goes through that router and says, okay, you're executing that command, that's this function, and that does this right here. And that way, if you have a menu, for example, that does the same exact command, like adding a new task, rather than it also calling this function directly, it also gets run through this router and executes that command right there. And that's pretty neat, so that you can have everything being enabled, disabled all at once without worrying about multiple places all over the place. So now, if I run this application, if I look at the code behind here, oh, I need to put some commands in there. I put those commands into the code behind here. Oh, you know what? I actually did this in this is C#. I did my other one in C#. So I'm going to pull this other one over so you can see how it runs real quick. And then I'm running out of time, but you can see, so since I'm running out of time, I'm going to skip the slides and just show you a couple other things. Back here in the code behind, the other thing I do, just like before, is I set my class live to my business objects. Here's where I'm instantiating an object that is my observable collection. Do you remember that observable collection that I used? And I use the observable collection because in the interface, if you use an observable collection, when you change the data, it'll change the object behind the data immediately, which is what we want. I'm going to defer to Robert's talk about data contexts and data binding. But here I'm loading all my objects in. And then I'm just going to comment the stuff out quick, and I'll just show you this real quick so you can see that it actually does work. I don't have my grid to show me the tasks yet. So if I say start, it should run while this is compiling tomorrow. Do we have any questions?
I don't see anything new. I know that Boudwin is still looking for some explanation, but thinking that he should come into your Q&A afterwards so you can go back and forth.
Okay, sounds good. Looking forward to that. I forgot to set my new window application as my startup application. So when I hit start there, it fired up the console application, of course. I'm going to try it one more time, and this should fire up my new WPF application with my buttons that actually do something. And there we go. So, oh, you know why? Because I didn't implement the print yet. So here's the power of of this application. It normally in FoxPro, it wouldn't complain about that when I compiled my application. It would just compile it and let me run it and ship it to my client. And then when I got an error, a runtime error, my client would call me and say, "Hey, you didn't implement the print." This tells me right off the bat that I didn't implement the print, and then I can fix that before I ship it out to them. So that's kind of handy. I'm going to wrap this up in just 1 second. I just want you guys to see this running in a little bit. Oops, on the other screen. Okay, so there's my WPF application with I didn't use the plus, I used my my ribbon, and then there's the print. But if I click print, I get a print message box. If I click the add new, I get an add new message box. And I know that's going to leave you wanting a little bit, but I implore you now to go look at Robert Vanderhulst's session, because he essentially takes it from here and shows you how to data bind everything on WinForms and WPF forms. So if you did want to use WinForms, you could actually do that as well. Okay. That's what I wanted. That is what I wanted. Why is that coming up like that? Ah, there it is. Okay. So let's see. We talked about adding our business objects. We have to add the using set class lab 2. We have to instantiate our business objects. We load them up, and then we change our message boxes to actually do the methods in the business objects that we want. The next task that we really need to do is, and we're not going to have time to actually show this live, but we need to create that custom control. And that's easily done. What you do is you right-click on that interface project. You say add a new item. There's an item for custom control. And then here I've laid out, this looks exactly like the one in FoxPro. And this is all the XAML it took to do that, which actually looks pretty good. Here's this one I used a user control. I used a dock panel. So I have this ribbon docked all the way to the left. I have this docked all the way to the top. I think you get the idea. An edit box, a couple of images, a text box. That's the custom control. And then adding a grid to show the data. Like I mentioned earlier when you asked about field mapping, you can't show data directly. You have to get it into a data structure that .NET recognizes. I used an observable collection for the reasons I mentioned. XSharp has a magic command called db data source, which you can find out more about in Robert's session, which pulls the data right out of a DBF and puts it into an object that is usable on all those structures that I showed you: data grids, grid views, list views, all that kind of stuff. And like the layout controls, these different ways of looking at your data have different behaviors. So in the end, what we were looking for is something that looks exactly like that, and we're still We still have some more work to do. We need to still hook up these buttons here so that they do the right thing, but that's easily done in a similar way that I hooked up these buttons. Couple more things I just want to mention real quick. I know we're out of time, but they are working on a VFP exporter. So look for the video for that in the XSharp sessions over there in the demos, expos. It will automate many of the things we saw today. I didn't talk about reports, but the entire .NET report ecosystem is available to you. Whether you want to use Stonehenge, no, that's not right, Stonefield, or Telerik, or anything else. I didn't really mention source control, but it's built right into Visual Studio. Very awesome. We use DBFs, but there's no reason we couldn't have used Oracle or SQL Server. It seems to me, looking at the forums on XSharp, that site-based SQL Anywhere is very popular, which is awesome. We didn't really talk about frameworks because there really aren't any frameworks for XSharp at this point, but kind of to Shonen's point, if you used a C# framework, application framework, and started with that, you could plug in your XSharp business object classes easily to that. I say easily. Of course, it's not easy, but it's easier than starting from scratch. And then, of course, the entire ecosystem of .NET external libraries is available to you for using in your code, as well as on the Visual Studio. Like we have Go Fish and things for our Visual Studio. There's all kinds of add-ons for Visual Studio you can get as well. And there's an awesome help system on xsharp.info, and I won't show it to you, but it's pretty complete help. One of the things they're working at is getting .NET Core compatibility, and if they can nail that down, that means that these apps, these WPF apps that I just showed you, will not just run on Windows, but also Linux and Macs, and also in WebAssembly, which is an up-and-coming awesome way of developing web applications. So your business objects will be available to your web apps easily without any sort of third-party interface. So summary, oh man, this session barely covered all the awesomeness that is XSharp. So we did our simple walkthrough to convert. Hopefully it was helpful to get you kind of some grounding in what we're talking about here. I will say XSharp is never going to be able to just run your existing FoxPro code as it is. You will have to take some effort. I've found the effort to be totally worthwhile, and there's a lot that you can do with it. It has made great strides and continues to make great strides, and it's open source, so feel free to jump in there and do some code. And so this is what you learned today. Hopefully that was good. I'll skip over the why XSharp because we kind of talked about that already. So next, like I mentioned, go over there and talk to the guys, who's ever there, Fabrice or Chris or Robert. They're super knowledgeable. Maybe get a Friends of XSharp subscription so that you show them some support. There is going to be a Q&A in another session with me. I'll turn the camera on live so you can actually talk to me. I'm sorry I went over a little bit. Pulled on that sample app from my GitHub account, and feel free to do pull requests if you want to improve it, to prove stuff. That'd be awesome. And hopefully we did accomplish our goal. This is the 3-tiered cake we're looking for. I think I nailed it. So thank you very much, and do fill out your evaluations. There's a link over there in the chat area as well, and you should have gotten your credentials emailed to you. Whew, that's it, Tamar.